Hey guys, tonight we travel back, not just a few hundred years, but a few thousand, to a world where the gods are petty, the mortals are clueless, and everyone's always either turning into a tree or hosting a very chaotic dinner party. Our sleepy guide? A certain curly-haired deity who loves grapes, chaos, and the occasional costume change, Dionysus. But before he was throwing theater festivals and inspiring toga-clad actors to scream into amphitheaters, Dionysus had quite the entrance. And let's just say, if your birth involved lightning bolts, jealousy, and an emergency womb transfer, you probably wouldn't survive that either. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Bonus points if you're already half asleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting through ancient Thebes, the air warm with the scent of crushed figs and wood smoke. There's something in the wind tonight, something dramatic. You hear whispers in the palace, a mortal woman named Semele, rumored to be entangled with Zeus. Yes, that Zeus, king of the gods, king of poor decisions. You don't know Semele personally, but you can tell she's the type who journals with a feather quill and signs her name with a heart. She's beautiful, yes, but more importantly, bold. She asks for proof of Zeus's identity. "Show me your true form," she says, fluttering her lashes like a naive sitcom character just before a commercial break. Bad move. Zeus, bound by oath and probably hoping this goes better than the last 87 times he dated a mortal, complies. He shows her his god form, thunder, lightning, the whole light show package. She's vaporized instantly. That's right, incinerated, a smoldering mortal crisp. And yet, this is where it gets mythologically weird, Semele was pregnant, and Zeus, in a panic that can only be described as divine dad mode, scoops up the unborn child and stitches him into his thigh. Yes, you heard that right. The god of Olympus becomes the world's first emergency surrogate via thigh flesh. Historians still argue whether this bizarre birth symbolizes rebirth, or whether ancient Greeks were just really into metaphorical body horror. Either way, the child gestates in Zeus's thigh like the world's most dysfunctional marsupial. And when he's ready, pop, out comes Dionysus, squirmy and divine, with a full head of curls and a tiny bottle of red wine. Okay, maybe not the wine, but the curls. Absolutely, you're now floating through Olympus, where baby Dionysus causes a stir. Hera, Zeus's actual wife, is not amused. She's been here before. She knows the Zeus cycle: seduce, explode, panic, repeat. But this time there's a child, part mortal, part divine. And Hera? She's out for vengeance. To protect the newborn god, Zeus does what all dads do in a crisis. He sends him into hiding. But he doesn't just pick a rural cabin or a nice foster family in Thessaly. Nope. Dionysus is handed off to the nymphs of Mount Nysa, an obscure, possibly imaginary location that sounds suspiciously like a sleepaway camp for mythological children. You trudge with the nymphs through forested hills until they settle in a cave. It's damp but cozy, decorated in ivy, and humming with sleepy cicada chatter. Here, the baby god is raised in secret. His caretakers, gentle nymphs and horned satyrs who teach him songs, dances, and how to ferment berries when no one's watching. And then there are the goat nannies. Yes, actual goats, not metaphorical ones. Fluffy, wide-eyed goats who bleat lullabies and occasionally chew on his blanket. They're sacred, apparently. Sacred and slightly judgmental. As Dionysus grows, you notice something odd. Plants react to him. Vines creep closer. Grapes swell on the vine when he giggles. And when he cries, oh, things wilt. Not dramatically, but just enough to make the cave feel like it's sulking. Mainstream scholars will tell you that this early connection to vegetation is symbolic of Dionysus' identity as a fertility and wine god. But others, the fringe types with ink-stained robes and strong opinions, suggest these stories reflect an even older agricultural cult, absorbed into the Olympian pantheon. Meanwhile, in the cave, life is surprisingly musical. The nymphs hum in odd harmonies while they mix honey and herbs. The satyrs teach him how to clap on beat. And Dionysus, even as a toddler, seems to know that life is better with a little performance. You watch him put on his first show. He stands on a rock, wraps himself in ivy, and makes the satyrs laugh with dramatic goat impressions. Not great impressions, but enthusiastic. You suspect this is less about divine inspiration and more about a sugar rush from fermented pomegranate juice. Still, something stirs in him, a desire to transform, to imitate, to lead others in laughter and release. You catch glimpses of what will one day become the theater. Mimicry, masks, music, movement. The pieces are all there, just waiting to ferment. Of course, none of this escapes Hera's gaze for long. She's got spies, peacocks mostly, judgmental ones with fabulous tail feathers. And soon the goddess finds out the boy lives. Zeus, again in damage control mode, moves Dionysus, again and again. The poor kid grows up like a divine backpack, passed from caretaker to caretaker across the Mediterranean. Everywhere he goes, something strange blooms. Wine, madness, laughter, and just a tiny bit of existential chaos. But through it all, you notice something. Dionysus never grows bitter. Maybe it's the wine, maybe it's the music, maybe it's the goats. But he's got a kind of sleepy resilience, a soft-spoken flair that says, let's keep the party going, even if we have to move it to another continent. And so you drift with him, from cave to cave, from nymph to nymph. The god of wine, theater, and joyful chaos is still in his infancy, but already the world begins to tilt slightly in his direction. You're drowsing now, lulled by the gentle creak of wind through olive trees and the faint bleating of goat lullabies echoing in the cave. Dionysus, still small but decidedly divine, toddles about with an ivy crown too big for his head and a tendency to trip over his own chiton. The nymphs watch him with the wary affection of overworked babysitters who've had one too many prophetic dreams. This isn't your typical divine upbringing. There are no thunderbolts, no golden chariots, just humble mountain life. Honeyed figs for breakfast, barefoot games among laurel trees, and the occasional whispered prayer from villagers who suspect there's something more to the curly-haired child in the hills. And of course, the goats are still here, always the goats. As Dionysus grows, so too does his curiosity and his knack for trouble. He doesn't mean to charm snakes out of baskets or make spring water turn into sweet wine. It just happens. One moment he's stomping grapes, the next he's conjuring a full-on vineyard with just a giggle and a sneeze. You, meanwhile, are just trying not to step on any sacred herbs. Historians still argue whether this early period represents a literal youth or a symbolic tale of seasonal transformation. Was Dionysus an actual child, or just the spring incarnate, playing dress-up with wild flowers and baby deer? Either way, something's changing. The satyrs are restless. The nymphs murmur about the signs. The cicadas hum louder at night. Even the goats seem moodier. One evening, the stars glimmer like spilled pearls, and Dionysus wanders off. You follow, your sandals soft on pine needles, past mossy stones and silent streams. He leads you to a meadow where moonlight curls like mist across the grass. There, standing on a small rise, Dionysus raises his arms, and vines twist up around him like eager dancers. Grapes burst forth in tiny clusters, and a strange warmth buzzes in the air. This is his first miracle, and it's not fire or fury, it's fermentation. Word spreads, as word always does in sleepy mountain regions where gossip is currency. Soon other wanderers arrive, curious folk with musical instruments, dusty sandals, and complicated backstories. A flute player who claims to have sung with Apollo. A weary woman who says she once saw Artemis herself, bathing beneath a waterfall. They gather, drawn by the god-child with laughing eyes and the uncanny ability to make wine out of rainwater. And so the entourage begins. You travel now, not in chariots, but with a sleepy caravan of vagabonds, mystics, and sandal makers. Dionysus, barely out of his teens, if gods even have those, decides it's time to see the world. His destination? Anywhere the grapes will grow, the drums can echo, and the people are tired enough to need a good party. It's less of a divine quest and more of a centuries-long backpacking trip. You wind through Lydia, Ionia, Phrygia. The air shifts from coastal breeze to highland chill. Dionysus picks up new followers, often outcasts, women shunned by their families, oddball musicians, and lonely shepherds with too much time and too many reeds. They call him Liberator, not because he wields a sword, but because when he dances, people forget to be afraid. Still, not everyone is thrilled about this god of joy creeping through their territory. In many towns, he's mistaken for a mere charlatan. In others, a dangerous disruptor of order. But he rarely fights back with violence. Instead, he confuses, disguises, delights. At one point, he's captured by pirates, and you're there, napping on a coil of rope as the ship sails south. Dionysus smiles politely, then turns the mast into a giant vine, fills the hull with ivy, and transforms into a lion mid-deck. The pirates, of course, leap into the sea, screaming. You yawn and roll over. Another day, another divine prank. Mainstream historians regard this episode as symbolic, perhaps an allegory for the way Dionysian cults captured new territories by dazzling locals with ecstatic rituals. Fringe theorists, meanwhile, argue it's a metaphor for intoxication. One sip of Dionysus, and you never sail the same waters again. Whatever the truth, Dionysus begins to lean into the idea of performance. Not just dancing, but spectacle. Each town gets a show. Strange masks, hypnotic music, sudden miracles. You help the maenads arrange leaves, hang garlands, rehearse chants that make your head swim and your limbs tingle. You even dabble in costume making. Togas with extra flair, sandals bedazzled in crushed amethyst. At one point, someone sews a cloak made entirely of dried grape skins, which Dionysus wears for exactly 3 minutes before declaring it itchy but iconic. And then there's the laughter. It bubbles up unexpectedly, during rituals, during meals, even in quiet moments by the fire. Laughter that isn't always joyful. Sometimes it sounds like crying in reverse. Sometimes it's a release so deep it leaves you blinking in silence afterward. Dionysus doesn't explain this. He just smiles and plays a note on his flute that makes the stars wobble slightly. One night, huddled under fig trees, you ask him if he misses Olympus, the golden halls, the godly bickering, the peacocks. He shrugs. They're too stiff, he says, and nobody ever laughs unless it's at someone. Instead, he prefers this: the road, the rhythm, the constant act of becoming. You watch him transform again and again. A nobleman, a girl, an old beggar, a child with a crooked smile. Dionysus wears identity like a costume, never lying, just shifting. And slowly, through the haze of incense and dreamlike nights, you begin to see it. This isn't just a wandering party. It's an awakening. Dionysus is gathering the broken, the weird, the overlooked, and giving them permission to be loud, wild, and whole. Theater isn't here yet, not exactly, but it's coming. You can feel it in the way people reenact Dionysus's stories around the fire, mimicking his miracles, chanting in rhythms that feel just a little too rehearsed. You sit by the fire, rubbing sleep from your eyes, as someone retells the tale of the pirate ship. They embellish it, of course, add a giant fish, throw in a dolphin ballet. Everyone laughs, even Dionysus. It doesn't matter what's true anymore. The story is the truth. And as the fire crackles low, and someone plucks a stringed lyre in a minor key, you realize something. This traveling wine god isn't just wandering. He's rehearsing. You wake to the crunch of sandals on dry leaves, the soft creak of a wagon wheel, and the low hum of a song no one quite remembers learning. The caravan has moved again, further east this time, through Anatolia into the wilder folds of Asia Minor, where myths grow thick as ivy, and the nights smell like sage and rain-soaked stone. Dionysus is older now, not by mortal years, by divine confidence. He walks taller, laughs louder, and his grape-colored robe somehow never gathers dust. You've seen him soothe wild dogs with a glance and make skeptical villagers dance in a circle against their will. Though honestly, the real miracle is how he convinces people to share their wine. This is the wander years, the god's long, looping, half-aimless journey through lands both historical and entirely mythical. You never quite know where you are anymore. One town claims to be founded by Prometheus himself. Another insists their river is actually a god in a bad mood. There's even a village where everyone speaks in rhymes and wears socks on their hands. That one might have been a dream. You're not sure. Mainstream historians debate whether Dionysus's eastern journey reflects real ancient trade routes, connections between Greek and Phrygian, even Indian, cult practices, or whether it's just a glorified road trip with bonus hallucinations. Fringe theorists, they say it's all part of a larger psychedelic religion. You're not going to argue with them, especially after that one evening involving poppy stew and a moonlit goat choir. But tonight, you've arrived somewhere special. Phrygia, land of strange rites, mountain winds, and the great mother goddess Cybele, whose priesthood includes ecstatic dancing and some very committed followers. You follow Dionysus into a grove of cypress trees, where people in flowing robes spin like tops and beat drums until the air seems to pulse. There's incense, always incense, and a haunting flute that seems to follow your thoughts. Dionysus watches, intrigued. This is where he learns something crucial. Joy isn't just fun. It's transformative. It's contagious. And yes, it can be dangerous. You, however, are mostly focused on not passing out from the smell of whatever someone just burned in that bronze pot. The rituals here aren't polite. They're loud, feverish, exhausting. And that's the point. People scream, laugh, cry, collapse. They're purging. Not of demons, not of sins, of control, of all the things they've been told to carry. And Dionysus? He drinks it in like sunlight. He doesn't try to outshine Cybele. He learns from her. You see it in the way he watches the dancers, in how he lets the rhythm get under his skin. He understands now that ecstasy, the kind that breaks boundaries and dissolves the self, is sacred. Of course, not everyone agrees. One priest mutters that this wine boy is just here to steal their thunder. Another claims the gods are jealous. You think he might just be upset that Dionysus brought better snacks. Still, the tension simmers. The idea of a god who celebrates madness is unnerving to many. Historians still argue whether these encounters between Dionysus and Eastern cults are evidence of religious synthesis or just mythological storytelling run amok. There's even a theory that Dionysus originated in the East and was only later added to the Greek pantheon, sneaking in through the back door with a bottle of wine and no formal invitation. You don't know what's true. You're too busy following the flute sounds into yet another festival. This one involves masks made from bark, rituals around a bonfire, and a competition to see who can recite poetry while balancing a wine jug on their head. You try, you fail, spectacularly, but Dionysus claps for you anyway. The thing is, these wander years aren't about conquest. Dionysus doesn't force belief, he invites it. His rituals don't punish, they invite release. He doesn't demand order, he exposes how fragile it really is. Some people fall to their knees and beg for blessings. Others chase him away with sticks. Occasionally, someone tries to worship him by carving a statue, only to find the wood turning to vine mid-chisel. And through it all, the god shifts. His identity, his form, his very presence becomes harder to pin down. One moment he's young and laughing, the next he's old and wise-eyed, muttering riddles that make your eyebrows twitch. You start to realize he's not just the god of transformation. He is transformation. At one point, you camp by a river. Dionysus sits by the bank, swirling wine in a clay cup. People think I bring madness, he says, almost too softly to hear. But it's not madness, it's freedom. It just looks scary if you've never been allowed to dance. You sip your own wine, which may or may not have just refilled itself, and watch the stars blur above the trees. Somewhere, a satyr strums a harp made from tortoiseshell and daydreams. Somewhere else, a chorus of maenads is rehearsing a song that doesn't quite have lyrics yet. You suspect it will soon. Because things are changing. Dionysus isn't just traveling anymore, he's teaching. Or perhaps infecting, in the nicest, dreamiest sense of the word. The people who join him start mimicking him. They tell stories about him. They dress like him, dance like him, pretend to be him. You see shepherds reenacting his miracles in the fields. You see women painting ivy crowns on their pottery. You hear little kids chanting his name during hide and seek. And every retelling is a little different. A little more dramatic, a little more performed. You begin to understand. Theater isn't going to happen all at once. It's going to grow, vine-like, out of these sleepy, wine-splashed rehearsals. And you're here for all of it. You're lying on a sun-warmed rock now, somewhere in the lazy hills of Lydia, listening to the distant rhythm of drums mixed with goat bells. Dionysus is pacing along a dusty trail ahead, barefoot and humming to himself, a melody that loops like a question you almost remember the answer to. The followers have multiplied. What once was a cozy group of misfits now resembles a low-maintenance music festival. Maenads in swirling veils twirl through the olive groves. Satyrs play double-reed flutes and argue about tempo. You spot a farmer from 2 towns ago, now fully converted, wearing ivy and trying to train his goat to walk on 2 legs. Spoiler, it's not going well. This is where things shift. Not because the wine's any stronger, though it definitely is, but because Dionysus has learned something. Joy can be weaponized. It sounds ominous, but don't worry. He doesn't smite. He enchants. You find yourself in the kingdom of Thrace. The sun is hot, the ruler is skeptical, and the court has a fondness for rigid tradition. You can smell the conflict before it starts, like sour grapes in the sun. King Lycurgus hears about the incoming wine cult and immediately calls it a threat to law and order, which is rich, coming from a man who wears 7 kinds of gold jewelry just to walk around his courtyard. Lycurgus bans Dionysus from entering the city. Classic mistake. You sneak into town anyway because rules mean nothing to satyrs with a mission. Dionysus doesn't storm the gates. He just throws a little forest gathering on the outskirts. Music, laughter, ecstatic dancing under the moonlight. It draws a crowd. More than a crowd. Half the city shows up just to see what the fuss is about. By sunrise, the guards are asleep in the vineyards, the priestesses are giggling by the fig trees, and Lycurgus is yelling at the clouds. The king demands the intruder be punished, but no one's really listening. They're too busy laughing. This isn't chaos for chaos's sake. This is what happens when people remember they're allowed to feel good. Historians still argue whether the Lycurgus myth is literal or cautionary, a reminder to rulers that stifling joy is a terrible PR strategy. Fringe scholars propose it's a commentary on agricultural cycles. Dionysus as the god of growth, Lycurgus as the frost. Either way, the king ends up cursed, confused, and very, very alone. You don't gloat. You're too busy admiring Dionysus's restraint. He could have flattened the palace with a single vine. Instead, he lets the king stew in his own seriousness. It's not about winning. It's about showing people they can dance. The next few towns are easier. People welcome the god with nervous delight. You help set up makeshift altars, usually a rock, some ivy, maybe a clay jug of homemade wine. Local flutists join in, and the maenads teach new converts how to twirl without falling into olive trees. You still haven't mastered it. But in the back of your mind, one name looms: Thebes, the city of Dionysus's birth, his mother's city, the place where Hera's jealousy set everything in motion, and also, coincidentally, the least likely to embrace a god of joyful mischief. Thebes is proud, organized, traditional. You can practically hear the town council arguing about grapevine permits. Still, Dionysus goes. You arrive in the early morning mist, just as merchants are setting out baskets of dates and leeks. Thebes is calm, dignified, suspicious. Word travels fast, and by midday the god's arrival is the topic of every market stall, temple corner, and public bathhouse. Enter King Pentheus. You watch him from behind a sleepy fig cart. Young, clever, overly fond of rules, Pentheus frowns at the idea of Dionysus. He calls him a fraud, a disturber of the peace. He threatens to arrest anyone caught worshipping the new god. You've seen this before. But Dionysus doesn't rage. He doesn't even protest. He simply walks the city, unnoticed, in disguise. Sometimes as a traveler, sometimes a priest, sometimes for fun, a remarkably tall woman with suspiciously perfect eyeliner. Everywhere he goes, stories spark, people whisper. The women of Thebes, the aunts, the sisters, the wives, begin slipping away at night. Into the hills, into the woods, into trance-like dances no one taught them. Pentheus is furious. He blames sorcery, hysteria, the wine. But mostly he blames Dionysus. And here you witness the first full divine performance. Dionysus plays Pentheus like a fiddle. He visits the king in disguise, planting ideas like seeds. If you're so concerned, he says lightly, why not dress as a woman and spy on these revelries? You think he's joking? He's not. By the next moonrise, Pentheus is wearing a veil and whispering about infiltration strategy. You and the maenads wait in the hills, trying not to laugh as the king tiptoes through the underbrush like a nervous deer in a bedsheet. What happens next? You don't see it all. Only fragments. A scream, a shattering, a crown made of laurel that falls into the dirt. Pentheus is torn apart, not by Dionysus, but by the maenads, who mistake him for a wild beast in their trance. One of them is his mother. It's not vengeance, it's a warning. Resist joy, and joy will undo you. You sit by a fire that night, shaken. Dionysus hums quietly, eyes closed. "I never wanted that," he murmurs. But some people only understand truth when it wears a mask. Historians still debate the Pentheus myth. Was it about gender roles, divine justice, theater itself? Some even call it the birth of Greek tragedy, a story where the hero's downfall is written into the stars, even as the chorus dances. All you know is, from that night on, something shifts in Dionysus. He becomes gentler, yes, but also more theatrical. His disguises deepen, his miracles grow more artful. The rituals become performances. And you? You realize that everything so far has just been rehearsal. Morning arrives on the heels of smoky incense and dew-damp grass. You stretch under a fig tree, stiff from sleep but not quite ready to leave the gentle lull of dreams. Around you, the camp stirs. Maenads rinse their hair in a nearby stream. Satyrs grumble about breakfast, and someone's playing a slow tune on a flute made from polished bone. Dionysus is quiet this morning. He walks among the crowd like a stage manager before curtain, checking garlands, adjusting veils, offering gentle nods to the musicians. There's a solemnity to him now, the kind that only comes after tragedy has brushed close. The memory of Pentheus still clings to the group like leftover fog, and though no one speaks of it directly, the air hums with unspoken questions. Was it justice? Was it madness? Or was it something else? You trail after Dionysus as he begins walking again. He doesn't say where you're going. You've learned not to ask. The path leads through olive groves, sleepy hills, and overgrown trails, until finally it opens onto something unexpected. A meadow, carved into the hillside like a shallow bowl. The acoustics are perfect. You can hear a satyr sneeze 50 feet away. This is where it begins. The idea, that is. You feel it take root as Dionysus stands in the center of the hollow and hums a simple tune that echoes like prophecy. He gestures to the others. The maenads gather. The satyrs pick up their flutes. And suddenly there's a scene unfolding before your eyes. Not just a dance, not just a song, but a story. A reenactment. They tell the tale of Pentheus. Not with words, but with movement and rhythm, with masks and mimicry. One Maenad takes the role of the king, another of Dionysus in disguise. The crowd watches in silence, breath caught like thread between fingers. You're not watching a ritual anymore. You're watching a performance. It's a little clumsy. One satyr forgets when to enter. Someone drops a prop goblet and it rolls down the hill. But it doesn't matter. Something new has been born. Theater. Not just stories told around the fire, not just myths repeated in whispers. This is live, interactive, embodied. You feel it in your chest like a second heartbeat. And the audience? Changed. They don't just watch. They remember. They relive. They laugh, they cry, they feel safe in the grief and madness because it's shared, contained, performative. No longer a dangerous force that consumes, it's become something that can be witnessed. Mainstream scholars argue that this early form of dramatic storytelling grew out of dithyrambs, hymns sung in honor of Dionysus by a chorus. They say the chorus would slowly step forward, take on roles, improvise dialogue. Over time, one voice would separate from the group. The first actor, the proto-thespian. You, of course, just remember that satyr trying to play two roles at once and confusing himself so badly he fell over the sacrificial table. Not all divine revelations are graceful. Still, word spreads. Villagers speak of the play on the hill. They bring food offerings, wine, more instruments. Someone suggests they do a comedy next time, a tale about a donkey who tries to seduce a wood nymph by pretending to be Apollo. You volunteer to be the donkey. Regret it almost immediately. The masks are evolving too. At first, they're just painted wood, then leather, then clay. Dionysus insists on exaggerated expressions, joyful, tragic, furious, faces large enough to be seen from far away. He teaches his followers that through a mask, one can be more truthful, not less. It's not deception, it's transformation. And oh, how the god loves transformation. He shifts again these days. Sometimes, in rehearsal, he plays roles himself, always with flair, always with a wink. You once watched him become an old woman, bent and grumbling, handing out olives and unsolicited opinions. No one recognized him until he turned into a lion mid-rant. You think he might be addicted to applause. You've begun rehearsing every night now, not just for fun, for ritual. Each performance serves a purpose, to retell, to remember, to remind. The story of Pentheus, the tale of the pirates, the myth of Semele, and the great thigh birth. Each one becomes part of the collective dream, and behind them all, Dionysus, no longer just a wanderer, no longer a boy in hiding. He is a god of theater now, of stories made flesh, of laughter made sacred. You see him writing new lines in the dirt with a stick, humming to himself, testing phrases for rhythm and meaning. Historians still argue whether Dionysus invented theater as a form of divine communication, or whether it was a side effect of his rituals. Either way, the effect is undeniable. People come away changed. In one village, a man who hasn't spoken in years begins reciting lines from the play, perfectly. In another, a grieving widow watches a tragedy and weeps for the first time since her husband's death. You watch, amazed, as a farmer once terrified of dancing becomes the lead actor in a tale about a rooster who thinks he's Zeus. Yes, that one was your idea. Yes, it bombed, but the kids loved it. More importantly, the idea is catching on. Dionysus doesn't have to lead every performance now. His followers carry the flame, teaching others, building little stone stages, crafting masks from local clay. The vine is spreading. And you? You've become a playwright, apparently. One night, as you sit by the fire scribbling scenes on palm bark, Dionysus leans over your shoulder. Try adding a dream sequence, he suggests, with talking goats. You nod. Of course. Talking goats, because in this world, joy and madness dance hand in hand. And through Dionysus, through his long, winding road of wine and whispering trees, theater has become the stage on which the soul safely reveals itself. And it's only just beginning. It's late afternoon now, the kind of warm, golden stretch of time where even the cicadas seem too lazy to sing. You lie in a patch of sun-dappled shade, your head resting on a rolled-up tunic, while nearby Dionysus calmly sips wine from a clay goblet shaped like a lion's head. The world is quiet for once, but you know that won't last, because in the distance over the rolling plains and the rustling olive trees, a new city looms, one that hasn't yet met the god of wine and theater. And it's time they did. This time, though, Dionysus isn't arriving as a wandering mystery. He's got a name now, a reputation. There are rumors ahead of him. Some call him a miracle worker. Others say he's dangerous. A few describe him as a harmless drunk in glittering robes who dances barefoot in vineyards and makes the best jokes about goats anyone's ever heard. The city gates open. You step inside. This place is stiff, upright, temple columns polished within an inch of their lives, statues of Athena and Apollo everywhere you look, cool, severe, untouchable. People here walk in straight lines, speak in measured tones, and look at your ivy wreath like it might be contagious. They don't dance. They don't laugh. They definitely don't welcome gods with a penchant for illusion and spontaneous grape generation. Still, Dionysus smiles. You've learned by now? That's when things are about to get interesting. The people refuse him entry into their official temple. So he shrugs and builds his own altar in the marketplace. Simple, ivy-twined. He leaves wine offerings, burns myrrh, and invites everyone. Not just priests or nobles, everyone. Even the fishmongers and sandal makers. At first, they watch from afar, skeptical. Then someone tastes the wine. They smile. They ask for more. Then someone recognizes one of the songs from a traveling dithyramb chorus. And before long, what began as a polite side glance turns into a full-blown festival rehearsal in the town square. Dionysus doesn't say a word. He just hands out costumes. That's when the city's rulers get involved. They summon Dionysus, accuse him of undermining tradition, of disruptive communal joy. You resist the urge to snort. Dionysus, for his part, listens with polite bemusement. He tilts his head, offers them wine. They decline. He shrugs again. Then comes the part you've seen before, the warning. In this case, it comes not through thunder or wrath, but through dreams. One by one, the city's leaders begin having strange visions, forests growing in their homes, their statues weeping, their robes replaced by vines. One man claims he woke up speaking in rhyming couplets and couldn't stop. Historians still argue whether these visions were part of the myth or symbolic warnings about the rigidity of authority. Fringe theorists suggest psychedelic infusions in Dionysian rituals. But you were there. You remember slipping dream leaves under the council chamber door. You've become sneakier lately. Eventually, the city relents. Not because they're convinced, but because they're exhausted. And maybe, just maybe, because they're curious. Dionysus organizes a celebration. Not a ritual, not a performance, a blend. A great wine-fueled, mask-wearing, music-playing happening. There's no script, no seating chart. Just stories told in laughter and mimicry, myths whispered in harmony, and wild improvisation that somehow makes perfect sense. And then, the crown jewel of the night, a new story. You're helping backstage now, organizing costumes made from bird feathers and lentil sacks. The play begins. A simple tale, really, of a king who forgets to laugh and a donkey who teaches him how. It's silly, gentle, oddly touching. The audience roars. Even the stoic high priest is chuckling, holding his belly like he's afraid it might split from the effort. And in that moment, between the laughter and the soft night air, you see what Dionysus sees. Theater isn't just about retelling myths or performing tragedies. It's about allowing a community to exhale, to come undone just a little, to remember they are not machines, that beneath the layers of law and marble and bronze lies something messy and deeply human. The next morning you help clean up flower petals and spilled wine. The city feels different, lighter. People greet each other with half smiles. Someone even plays a flute on the temple steps. You sit beside Dionysus under a fig tree. He looks pleased but not smug, just satisfied, like a gardener watching the first green sprout push through the soil. You see, he murmurs, laughter is more persuasive than lightning. You nod, then sneeze. There's still too much incense in your tunic. From this point on, the performances become more regular. Theaters, actual physical structures, begin to emerge. Not grand, not yet, just simple stone semicircles built into hillsides. The acoustics, surprisingly good, and you've started to learn how to project your voice, mostly so the back row can hear your donkey impression. These theaters aren't just for Dionysus. They're dedicated to him. His name becomes carved into stone altars and whispered by actors before every performance. He's no longer just a visitor. He's a patron, a presence, a god of joy, of transformation, of story. And you start to see the bigger picture. Every tragedy performed, every comedy staged, every audience member who gasps or giggles or sobs. It all traces back to a boy born from a lightning-struck womb and a god's panicked thigh. The parties, it turns out, were just Act 1. The days pass like drifting clouds, soft, slow, and scented faintly with time. You find yourself back on the road again, though now it's less of a wandering pilgrimage and more of a mobile performance troupe. You've got props, costumes, a satyr who insists on playing tragic roles, even though his voice cracks when he tries to sound serious. Dionysus is in his element. Not in temples, not on thrones, but on makeshift wooden stages, surrounded by people learning how to tell stories by becoming them. He started encouraging disguises, not just for fun, but for freedom. You see it happening everywhere. In one town, a shy stonemason dons a lion mask and transforms into a roaring god-king for the night. In another, a widow steps onto the stage dressed as Hermes and delivers a monologue that leaves the whole village stunned. These aren't just performances, they're liberations. Permission slips for the soul. And Dionysus, he applauds every single one, usually while holding a fig tart in one hand and a goblet in the other. Masks are the heart of it. Painted wood, sometimes clay, sometimes just elaborately tied cloth. Dionysus explains that the mask isn't meant to hide, it's meant to reveal. Through it, people are no longer bound by who they're supposed to be. They become what they've always almost been. He wears them too. A new one every day, sometimes multiple times in an hour. One moment he's a giggling child, the next, a stern prophet muttering riddles about wine and war. You suspect he has a secret stash of masks hidden in his cloak. One afternoon, you find him in a meadow surrounded by half-finished props and a freshly carved stage made of old wagon wheels and borrowed beams. He's painting a mask, deep red, with ivy designs curling around the eyes. This, he tells you, holding it up to the sun, is how you trick people into truth. Historians still argue whether Dionysus himself was the first actor, if he quite literally stepped out of the chorus as the first speaker in Greek drama. Others say he merely inspired it, like a muse with a flair for wine and costume changes. The records are unclear, but what's certain is this. The line between god and performer, between ritual and theater, began to blur under Dionysus's gaze. You feel it when he speaks to crowds. He doesn't give sermons. He doesn't demand prayers. He performs. Not with a script, but with emotion, passion, rhythm. He tells stories that you know aren't literal, but somehow feel truer than truth. One time, he pretends to be a blind beggar recounting how he once shared wine with Hera and lived. You know it's made up. Probably. Maybe. Still, it moves you. And therein lies the magic. The masks allow people to say things they could never say as themselves. They ask questions through character. They cry without being judged. They laugh at things they're too afraid to name out loud. It's therapy by way of myth. One night you perform a comedy about an old farmer trying to invent the wheel, except he keeps making triangles. It's silly, full of bad puns and exaggerated pratfalls. The audience laughs so hard you worry someone will dislocate a rib. And afterward, the town priest thanks you. Says he hasn't laughed since his daughter moved away. That's the thing about Dionysus's influence. It sneaks up on people. It doesn't demand conversion. It invites play. Even the skeptical start to lean in. The laughter, the music, the gentle ridiculousness, it wears people down, softens them. The god himself remains elusive. Even now, you're never quite sure who he is, or where he is. Sometimes he's right beside you, singing a nonsense song about fish with umbrellas. Other times he's vanished for days, only to return wearing a crown made of radishes and speaking in metaphor. You ask him once why he uses so many masks. He looks at you, deadpan, and says, "Because if I wore only one face, you'd grow bored." You almost believe him. Fringe theorists love to debate the symbolism of masks in Dionysian worship. Were they metaphysical tools, psychological release valves, precursor technology for identity deconstruction? You suspect they were mostly just fun, but also transformative. A way to hold truth at arm's length until people were ready to look it in the eye. The cities grow more receptive, the plays more elaborate. You start seeing full casts, full choruses, masks layered with painted detail, scripts scratched into wax tablets and memorized by heart. What began as impulsive performance has matured into craft, and at the center of it all, still, Dionysus. You catch him once, alone, standing behind the stage, watching a young girl perform a solo monologue as Ariadne. She trembles with every word, her voice cracks. She finishes the last line, something about loss and longing, and the meadow is silent. Then applause. Wild, unfiltered, wholehearted applause. Dionysus doesn't smile. He just wipes a tear from his cheek and says quietly, That is why we do this. You don't say anything. Just stand beside him, letting the night settle into your bones. From that point on, the masks are not just tools of storytelling. They're offerings. Sacred extensions of a god who understands that joy and pain are not opposites, but twin faces of the same expression. And every time someone steps on stage with a mask, they are not pretending. They are becoming. By now, you've become so accustomed to the rhythm of wine, stories, and performance that anything resembling a normal town feels foreign. So when you arrive at the city preparing for the great Dionysia, it's like walking into a dream someone else started writing. The city buzzes, not with politics or war, but with anticipation. Garlands hang from balconies, children rehearse chorus lines in the streets, bakers prepare honeyed cakes shaped like masks, and everyone from the highest official to the humblest olive picker talks about one thing. The festival. Not just any festival. The festival. The Dionysia. You help unload carts filled with props, tunics, and long scrolls of freshly written scripts. Satyrs bounce around trying not to step on the costumes. Dionysus, of course, arrives fashionably late, wearing a robe of golden silk and a mask so extravagant it's part bird, part thundercloud. But this festival isn't just another party. It's seasonal, timed with the spring, when the vines begin to bud, when the world softens under warmer winds. It's both celebration and ritual, both joy and mourning. You can feel the duality in the air, because the great Dionysia isn't all comedy and pratfalls. It begins with tragedy, a sacred tribute to the god who knows not only joy, but grief in its deepest hues. As the sun rises over the amphitheater, you shuffle in with the rest of the crowd, thousands of people all silent now, waiting. The air smells of crushed time, baked earth, and a hint of expectation. And then, the chorus begins. You watch, spellbound, as the tragedians take the stage. There are three of them, actors playing multiple roles, slipping behind masks with the practiced ease of seasoned performers. Their voices rise and fall like waves, narrating tales of doomed heroes, proud kings, and decisions that unravel lives. It's heavy, intentionally so. You feel it in your chest like a slow ache. The tragedies are less about sadness and more about recognition, a communal reckoning with the part of being human that tries and fails and tries again. And Dionysus? He's seated at the front, draped in ivy, unmoving. A presence, a symbol, a reminder that art is born of both joy and sorrow, and both deserve applause. Historians note that these tragedies were competitions, playwrights vying for prestige, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, great names who composed verse that would ripple through centuries. But to you, watching from the dusty steps of the theater, it's not about who wins. It's about why people keep coming back. To feel, to weep safely, to let sorrow bloom like the first grape on the vine. You spend the next day preparing for the comedic portion of the festival. It's a shift, like waking from a fever dream to find your friends dressed in fish costumes and yelling at a mock philosopher. The comedy is loud, messy, satirical. The actors wear exaggerated masks with huge eyes and gaping mouths. Their lines are riddled with innuendo and irreverence, but never cruelty. This, too, is worship. Dionysus watches the comedies with the same reverence as the tragedies. He laughs, deep, belly-shaking laughs that make even the most stoic priest smile. He applauds the fart jokes, the fish jokes, the unexpected poetry hidden in the chaos. You realize something, mid-performance. This is balance, to mourn, to laugh, to perform both with equal weight. The festival also includes processions, sacred ones. A huge wooden statue of Dionysus is wheeled through the streets, followed by torch-bearers and flute players. People dance, some cry, some sing old songs no one remembers writing. And in every moment, theater is present, not as entertainment but as ritual, as offering, as communion. You help hang garlands on the backs of audience seats. You sprinkle crushed myrtle on the threshold to the stage. You hand masks to nervous performers, telling them, "He sees you. Just be true." One night, after a particularly powerful tragedy, a story about a king who sacrifices too much, Dionysus invites the playwright to sit with him. The man weeps, not from sadness, but from release. "You helped them feel," Dionysus says, pressing a hand to his heart. "That's the greatest art of all." Fringe scholars argue that the great Dionysia blurred the line between civic duty and divine celebration. Some even say the plays served as democratic rituals where society processed trauma together. Maybe that's true, but in the flickering lamplight under a sky thick with stars, it feels simpler than that. People need stories. They always have. And Dionysus, curly-haired, wine-soaked, unpredictable Dionysus, is the god who gave them a stage on which to play. As the festival draws to a close, you stand at the back of the theater and watch a final performance. It's a new kind of play, one where the chorus argues with the actors, and the ending is left open, unresolved. The audience sits, hushed. Then applause. Not polite, not thunderous, grateful. Dionysus stands, removes his mask, bows, not as a god, but as someone who sees. You walk with him afterward through quiet streets, littered with fig leaves and wine-stained cloth. The torches flicker low. The city sleeps. And in that soft silence you understand. Theater isn't about pretending. It's about revealing. You wake to the sounds of hammering, dull, methodical thuds that echo down from the hills like a very determined woodpecker. When you squint into the sun, you see them, Workers hauling stone, scraping beams, arguing over angles. Another theater is being built. This one's bigger. Wider curve, taller seats, better acoustics. It's nestled into the slope of a hill like a sleeping animal, tail coiled around the stage. Dionysus stands nearby, arms folded, watching it all with a small, satisfied smirk. Not because he's impressed with the craftsmanship, though it is excellent, but because it means the stories are here to stay. This isn't just a shrine, it's a monument to collective imagination. You help carry baskets of sand and paint the first outlines of stage markers. Satyrs bicker over whether the backdrop should be painted sky blue or fig leaf green. One of them insists on a trap door for dramatic entrances. Another keeps suggesting the inclusion of live chickens. You're not sure he's joking. This amphitheater, like others beginning to dot the Greek world, is designed not only to worship Dionysus, but to house the very essence of his influence. Here, drama will unfold not as a private ritual, but as a public necessity. You sit on the edge of the first row, tracing the grooves in the stone with your fingers. Imagine it full. Imagine thousands of people, pressed shoulder to shoulder, leaning forward in absolute silence. And then, laughter, or gasps, or even that quiet moment when everyone forgets to breathe. Theater has become the medium through which cities wrestle with big questions. What is justice? What is loyalty? What do we owe the gods and each other? Dionysus didn't teach them the answers. He gave them a place to ask. Mainstream historians will tell you that amphitheaters served civic as well as religious functions, that Athenian citizens were required to attend plays during certain festivals, and even subsidized if they couldn't afford a ticket, which, to you, is hilarious. Imagine a government so dedicated to art that they pay people to go watch sad kings cry in masks. Still, it works. You see it yourself in town after town. Cities that once shunned Dionysus now celebrate him openly. Priests and politicians sit side by side in the audience. Nobles laugh at jokes told by actors wearing fake noses and wildly oversized tunics. And the architecture? Ingenious. The theaters are built into natural hillsides, curved to carry sound like a whisper down a corridor. No need for microphones. One actor in the center of the stage can speak in a normal voice, and everyone can hear him. You test it. Whisper a line from a comedy. Why did the oracle refuse a second date? Your voice bounces back to you like a sleepy echo. A satyr in the upper row groans, because she already foresaw how it ends. Even in reverent places, the jokes persist. More impressive than the acoustics, though, is the community. These theaters don't just showcase plays. They host debates, ceremonies, mourning rituals. They become places where joy and grief are shared, not hidden. And always, the performances are offered to Dionysus. Sometimes his statue is wheeled out and given a front row seat, draped in cloth, adorned with fresh ivy, goblet in hand. Sometimes Dionysus himself sits in disguise among the crowd, nodding along to a particularly tragic monologue or cackling at a farce involving mistaken identities and at least one angry goose. He tells you one night after a well-received tragedy that watching mortals grieve through performance is the most honest form of praise he's ever known. They make beauty out of heartbreak, he says. Even I can't do that without a rehearsal. And still he changes. His image, once wild and elusive, begins to settle into symbols. Ivy, wine, masks, the thyrsus, a staff wrapped in vine leaves topped with a pine cone. These appear on coins, on temples, carved into stone beside stage entrances. He becomes not only a myth, but an institution. You see his likeness etched beside Apollo and Athena now, not as their equal in logic or war, but as their equal in necessity. He's not the god of frivolity. He's the god of catharsis. You watch cities build entire festivals around his name, not just because it pleases him, but because it pleases them. The plays, the songs, the laughter, and the lament, they've become part of how these people process life. Fringe scholars argue that the expansion of Dionysian theater was a social valve, an outlet for tensions, class frustrations, and suppressed desires. And sure, maybe, but that feels too clinical, too modern. When you sit in that amphitheater watching a widow in a paper crown perform the role of Medea with trembling hands and a voice like thunder, you don't think about politics. You think about truth. One day, you're helping build a mask rack backstage, and a boy asks you how long the performance will last. You shrug. As long as it needs to. He nods solemnly. Good, he says. Sometimes I don't want to go home after. You smile, because you know exactly what he means. And later that night, as you sit beside Dionysus, under a canopy of stars and crushed grape skins, he says quietly, "Theater isn't an escape. It's a way in." You don't reply. You just pass him a fig tart and watch the next amphitheater begin to take shape in the distance. The morning fog hangs low over the fields like a sleepy thought that hasn't quite formed. You and the rest of the troupe, if that's even the right word anymore, are setting up for a new performance in a coastal town whose name you can never quite remember. Dionysus is nearby, supervising the placement of vines and fig branches around the stage. Atmosphere matters, he says, tucking a grape behind one ear. Theater is as much about feeling as it is about plot. You've come a long way since the early chaos of goat dances and spontaneous wine fountains. Now, performances have structure, scripts, direction. You miss the improvisational nonsense of the old days sometimes, especially the accidental play where the chorus got lost and a confused donkey had to step in. But this new phase is something else, something grand. The tragedies have grown deeper. Characters now struggle with fate, family, guilt. The stakes feel heavier, and audiences, once just curious, now arrive with expectations. They've started craving catharsis like they once craved wine. This town, like many, is excited. You hear murmurs of the famous tragoidoi, goat singers, returning to perform the tale of a warrior who unknowingly marries his own mother. You wince. That one's never easy to stage, but it's a crowd favorite for reasons you try not to think too hard about. As you help prepare the goatskin props and glue on beards, Dionysus lounges in the shade, eating olives and reading over the latest script. He looks pleased, but he's been quieter lately, more reflective, watching from the edges of the rehearsal rather than starring in them. You think back to the early days, maskless, messy, musical chaos, and now here you are, polishing lines for a show where everyone dies by Act 3. This isn't just divine mischief anymore, it's art. Historians say that tragedy as a genre evolved directly from Dionysian rituals, starting as dithyrambs, expanding into choral odes, then branching into individual performances. The goat song theory, that tragoidia comes from goats offered to Dionysus, is still debated. Fringe scholars insist the goats are symbolic. Others say the ancient Greeks just really liked goats. You wouldn't be surprised either way. The tragedy you're staging today is grim. A king fated to kill his father and marry his mother, blind to his destiny until it's too late. There's no redemption. No resolution, just pain, confusion, and exile. And yet, the audience is rapt. They don't look bored. They don't fidget. They lean forward, eyes wide, mouths half open. They aren't watching for entertainment. They're watching to feel. You sit beside Dionysus during the performance. He watches the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. The actor playing the tormented king throws himself to the ground, sobbing through his mask, clutching a red-stained tunic. It's over the top. It's melodramatic. It's perfect. When the play ends, there's a long silence. Then applause. But it's not raucous. It's reverent. The way someone might clap after a funeral or a prayer, as if they're not just applauding the actor, but what they've just lived through. Because that's the secret of tragedy, you've learned. It's not about telling people how to feel. It's about giving them a safe place to feel, a structure for chaos, a container for grief. Dionysus says as much later, swirling wine in a wooden cup. Mortals pretend they don't want pain, he muses, but give them a play where someone weeps on stage for all the things they never said, and they'll beg you for an encore. He's right, of course. And tragedy? It's thriving. New playwrights appear, eager and experimental. Some challenge the gods, others explore justice, war, betrayal. One even stages a play where the chorus is the main character. People call it confusing. You call it ambitious. Audiences keep coming. They weep, not for the characters, but for themselves, for their lost chances, their regrets, their unspoken longings. You help a young actor backstage, adjusting his cloak before his entrance. "What if I forget my line?" he whispers. "Then feel your way through it," you reply. Truth always finds its voice. Not all the plays are perfect. Sometimes a mask slips off mid-monologue. Sometimes someone faints from heat stroke. One performance is nearly derailed when a wild goat breaks into the orchestra pit. But even the mistakes are embraced. In Dionysian theater, imperfection is part of the ritual. Later, you gather by torchlight with the troupe, sipping diluted wine and discussing tomorrow's performance. A new work exploring hubris through the tale of a woman who challenges Athena to a weaving contest. Someone suggests adding a dance number. Someone else suggests a spider puppet. You write it all down. Dionysus listens from the shadows, only occasionally interjecting with quiet encouragement. You realize he doesn't need to lead anymore. He's seeded the idea, nurtured it. Now it grows on its own. And yet, you sense something else from him lately, a kind of melancholy, as if creating this world of beauty and heartbreak has cost him something, though he'd never admit it. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" you ask him one night. He shrugs. Pretending is how mortals tell the truth. And with that, he slips on a mask and vanishes into the night. You think of him as the god of theater, yes, but also of permission. Permission to feel deeply, to grieve, to rejoice, to dress up as a goat and scream into the wind. And maybe, just maybe, that's more divine than thunderbolts and golden chariots. The sun crests lazily over the horizon, spilling warm gold over clay rooftops and dusty fig orchards. You're back in Athens now. Again. The city feels both familiar and new each time you arrive. There's always a new playbill being hammered to the stone wall of a bathhouse, or a freshly carved mask in a shop window with exaggerated eyes and a jawline so sharp it could cut goat cheese. But today's different. Today you're not here to perform. You're here to watch. A new genre has been added to the theater circuit. Comedy. Not just jokes tucked into tragedies or clever asides in myth retellings, but full, standalone comedies. Plays written with the singular goal of making people laugh so hard they snort diluted wine out of their noses. You're skeptical. After all, you've helped stage enough three-act tragedies to know that Greek audiences like their stories heavy and morally complicated. But Dionysus insists this new wave is important. Tragedy cleanses sorrow, he tells you, swirling wine in a cup painted with dancing maenads. But comedy reminds them life isn't always a performance. You file that away, unsure what it means. Then the play begins. And within 5 minutes, you're crying. From laughter. It's outrageous. The main character is a man with too many goats and not enough brain cells who thinks the moon is angry at him because he's bad at dancing. The dialogue is fast, sharp, bizarre. A chorus of frogs interrupts to sing about cheese. There's a subplot involving a talking wine jug that wants to join the military. And somehow, it works. The audience is howling. One older woman in the front row is actually wheezing. A stern-faced general laughs so hard he drops his ceremonial helmet. Even the chorus can barely stay in character. This is a different kind of worship. No incense, no tragic catharsis. Just shared joy. Permission to laugh at power, poke fun at the gods, and wear absurd costumes with padded stomachs and floppy shoes. Historians call this old comedy, satirical, irreverent, often vulgar. Aristophanes will become its champion, writing plays that criticize politicians, philosophers, even Dionysus himself. And Dionysus, he'll love every minute of it. Because in comedy, there's freedom. You see it backstage, too. The actors are looser. The script allows room to riff. One of them adds a joke about olive oil prices that gets the loudest laugh of the night. Another improvises a dance halfway through a monologue, causing a chain reaction of laughter so intense the chorus forgets their cue. Fringe scholars argue that comedy evolved not from sacred ritual, but from village revelries, unsanctioned street parodies that eventually made their way onto formal stages. But others believe comedy is as sacred as tragedy, just sneakier about it. You're inclined to agree. After the performance, you and Dionysus walk through the back alleys of the city, still chuckling over a scene where a man tries to sue the sun for burning his grapes. The god's mood is light, giddy. They think I'm all wine and weeping, he says, grinning. But laughter's just as sacred, sometimes more. It's true, comedy, for all its absurdity, brings people together in a different way. It flattens hierarchy. A slave can outwit a king. A chorus of animals can make a philosopher question his beliefs. The powerful are mocked, and the foolish are embraced. Even the gods are fair game. One play you see features Dionysus himself trying to decide which dead playwright to bring back from the underworld. The jokes are endless. He's portrayed as fussy, indecisive, a bit of a diva. But the audience loves him all the more for it. Because a god who can laugh at himself, that's a god worth keeping around. You help build props for the next show, oversized vegetables, fake beards, a rubber fish that's supposed to represent the economy. It makes no sense. It's hilarious. There's a strange kind of courage in this form. Tragedy asks you to feel deeply. But comedy asks you to be vulnerable, to laugh at yourself, to admit that life is messy, confusing, often ridiculous. Dionysus begins encouraging this even in his temples. Worshippers wear masks, not of anguish, but of wide grins and puckered lips. Offerings include sweet cakes shaped like ridiculous animals. You even hear rumors of a secret festival of foolery held on moonless nights where everything is backward and no one is allowed to speak in a straight line. The lines between sacred and silly blur further, and theater becomes even more essential. In this city and many others now, people need a release. There are wars, famines, laws that grow stricter, lives that grow harder. But comedy offers a small rebellion, a reminder that the world, for all its cruelty, is also deeply, profoundly absurd. You realize that Dionysus's greatest invention wasn't just tragedy or wine or ecstasy. It was permission. Permission to feel, to cry, to laugh, to wear a donkey head and sing about beans while holding a torch made of cheese, because sometimes that's what healing looks like. The breeze today is slow and warm, like an exhale that's been waiting all year to be released. The amphitheater is quiet now. Yesterday's comedy festival left the stage scattered with broken fig tarts, a few forgotten masks, and what appears to be a sandal nailed to a fake fish. You're helping sweep up while Dionysus lounges in the corner, sipping watered wine and watching with a soft grin. But beneath that calm, something new stirs in the air, a kind of shift, a gravity that pulls your attention toward the marble steps of the city's Bouleuterion, the place where Athenian democracy gathers to think very hard about everything. Because today, theater isn't just entertainment, it's homework. You're entering a strange and beautiful phase in the life of Dionysian drama, the moment when performance becomes civic duty, when plays don't just delight or console, they educate. Each year, citizens are required, yes, required, to attend dramatic festivals. It's not optional, not a hobby. You're expected to sit for hours, sometimes days, and watch stories unfold that make you confront something inside yourself. And afterward, you're supposed to think about it. Hard. You ask a local stonemason why he always comes to the tragedies. He shrugs. Helps me understand what not to do with my family. Fair enough. You meet a soldier who tells you he once cried during a play about a boy who never returns from battle. Felt real, he mutters. More real than the war. And in the audience you start seeing everyone. Rich merchants, slaves granted festival freedom for the day, politicians, philosophers, goat herders. They sit shoulder to shoulder, weeping for the same lost king, laughing at the same fool's joke. For a few hours all are equal beneath the masks. Dionysus wanders the crowd sometimes, in disguise of course, occasionally as a sleepy priest, sometimes a loud-mouthed wine seller, once as a child who offered olives to everyone in the front row. He doesn't interfere. He just observes. You see, he whispers to you once, his voice the hush between two lines. Democracy needs drama, otherwise it forgets how to feel. Historians note that the plays performed during these festivals often held strong political messages. Some even addressed current events, cloaked in myth. Fringe scholars argue that this was subliminal mass therapy disguised as civic engagement. You think it might just be both. One play, in particular, stays with you. It's about a general who returns home victorious, but is haunted by the cost. He paces, he rages, he questions whether the war was worth it. The chorus, representing his people, doesn't know how to answer. The audience is silent, not from boredom, but because they know. Some of them have lived it. Others are living it now, and somehow watching someone else go through it, even in a mask, helps. You start to notice the effect beyond the theater. In the marketplace, people reference lines from the plays in arguments. You're acting like Agamemnon in Act 2, someone says during a heated olive negotiation. Others debate whether a certain law feels more like a tragic mistake or a comedic setup. Theater becomes language. It becomes framework, a way to understand the world. Even the judges of the dramatic contests, citizens randomly selected, treat their role with a mix of dread and reverence. To evaluate art, to decide which story carried the most truth. That's no small task. Dionysus seems both amused and moved by this seriousness. "They built me a temple," he says one evening, lying in the grass beside the stage. "But this sacred silence after a final line, that's the real altar." You nod. You've seen people sit for minutes after a tragedy ends, unable to move, unwilling to let go of the feeling, as if the story is still echoing in their bones. And then there's the education. Young boys are brought to performances as part of their upbringing. They learn morality not from lectures, but from watching Orestes wrestle with vengeance or Antigone defy authority in the name of love. They memorize the weight of silence, the power of a well-timed line. Athenian educators begin using plays as tools in their lessons. Teachers quote passages as examples of ethics, oratory, emotion. You overhear one tutor say, "To understand humanity, you must understand Dionysus' stage." The god himself mostly shrugs this off, but you catch him beaming after a particularly moving recitation by a young student. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. There are critics, always critics. Some say comedy's gotten too vulgar. Others say tragedy is too political. A few grumble that Dionysus shouldn't be worshipped with stories that include fake vomit and dancing pigs. But the crowds keep growing. The plays keep evolving, and theater continues to be not just a mirror, but a conversation. You find yourself caught up in it, writing lines that challenge assumptions, directing scenes that feel risky, watching from behind the curtains as audiences wrestle, weep, and, sometimes, change. One morning, a young woman stops you in the market. "I saw your play last week," she says. "I was going to leave my husband. Then I watched that queen stand alone on stage and choose silence instead of fury. I changed my mind." You don't know what to say. She smiles. "Thank you. You tell Dionysus about it later." He raises his goblet and says, "That's better than a sacrifice." And you believe him. Because this is no longer about performance. It's about participation. And the city, for all its flaws, has learned something ancient and vital. That truth, spoken in verse and voice, is sacred. And those who hear it, really hear it, carry it forward. The moon is full again, casting pale silver over the worn stones of the stage. You sit near the back of the amphitheater, knees hugged to your chest, watching a rehearsal unfold in torchlight. The actors are practicing a new scene, a retelling of Dionysus' first arrival in Athens, full of jokes, costume changes, and a particularly dramatic reenactment of the wine god's entrance on a cart pulled by singing goats. Dionysus, true to form, insists the goats be slightly more theatrical this time. You smile to yourself. It's been years since you first followed this god on his winding, vine-covered path. Years since the wild hillside festivals, the whispered rituals in the forest, the secret performances in villages too proud to laugh. Now things are different, bigger, more refined, but not without mystery, because Dionysus hasn't stopped shifting. If anything, his transformations have grown more elaborate. Some days he's a somber, quiet figure who walks the empty rows of the theater before dawn, whispering lines only the wind seems to hear. Other days he's flamboyant and electric, dancing in public squares and turning entire crowds into impromptu choruses with nothing but a wink and a twirl of his staff. You once saw him pose as a critic during a tragic competition, loudly praising the worst performance, just to see how many others would agree. When confronted, he replied, "A lie in costume can still reveal the truth." Classic Dionysus. More cities now claim him as their patron. Temples bear his image, wild eyes, ivy-crowned, half-smiling like he knows the punchline to a joke no one else has heard yet. Wine remains a major offering, but now you see more masks left at his altars. Little clay ones painted in joy or sorrow. a tribute not just to the god, but to the selves people become under his influence. He doesn't need lightning bolts or sacred fires to be powerful. He has mirrors, and people keep looking. Historians often describe Dionysus as the god of paradox, of opposites fused into a single vine-wrapped figure. He is the god of life and death, ecstasy and despair, illusion and revelation. He brings madness that heals, chaos that clarifies. Fringe scholars, predictably, take it further. They say Dionysus isn't just a god at all, but a spiritual archetype, a force that exists across cultures in different masks, the trickster, the shaman, the sacred clown. A necessary disorder that awakens deeper order. You're not sure where the lines fall anymore, but sitting here under the moonlight with the smell of fig leaves in the air and a flute humming softly from the stage, you understand this. Dionysus remains, not because people fear him or need him to explain the weather, but because he allows them to be something they usually aren't allowed to be, free. You remember the story of Pentheus, so rigid, so proud, so sure of his boundaries, and how Dionysus didn't destroy him with fire or wrath, but with seduction, with illusion, with invitation. He offered the king a mask, and Pentheus, in his need to control, refused to understand it. Now, across Greece and beyond, people accept the mask. They wear it gladly, sometimes tearfully, always intentionally. It's not deception, it's revelation. Even in Rome you hear whispers that Dionysus, called Bacchus there, is gaining ground. His followers, the Bacchae, grow in number. His festivals continue to blur the lines between worship and art, chaos and meaning. The Romans don't always understand him, but they feel him. They always do. You ask him once, Dionysus that is, why he chose theater as his great gift. He's watching a rehearsal at the time, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in concentration. The actor on stage is performing a monologue about grief, something about a father, a sacrifice, and a broken promise. It's raw, imperfect, real. Dionysus doesn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he says, "Because everyone wants to say something they're not allowed to say, and I give them a voice that isn't theirs, but somehow always is." You don't press further. You just nod. Because you understand. Theater is the space between what is felt and what is shown. A sacred middle ground where people can be someone else just long enough to understand themselves. And that is his domain. More and more you find yourself drawn to the edge of the stage, not just as a writer or director, but as a witness. You begin to see each performance not just as a show, but as a ritual, a reenactment of transformation. Someone loses themselves, someone finds themselves, and someone, sometimes the same person, returns changed. Dionysus watches it all, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping, sometimes slipping into the crowd and taking notes for no reason but his own delight. And though the world keeps turning, wars, politics, temples rising and falling, his stage remains. Because long after the gods of thunder and law and prophecy fade into stone dust, people will still gather to weep beneath a mask, and they will still offer that mask to him. The sun is sinking now, painting the city in sleepy golds and soft pinks. From your perch behind the stage, you can hear the low murmur of the crowd settling in. Not buzzing, not chattering, settling. The way a flock settles before sleep, restless, then still. Tonight's performance isn't one of the old tragedies or even a silly farce. It's a new piece, one no one's quite sure how to categorize. It blends song with movement, poetry with silence. No gods appear in the story, no kings fall. It's about a fisherman who dreams he is a bird. And yet, the anticipation is palpable. You tighten the final mask onto a young performer's face. She's nervous. What if they don't get it? She whispers, wide-eyed. You give her the only answer Dionysus ever gave you. Then they'll feel it. Because by now, the audience doesn't always need explanation. They've been trained by repetition, by ritual, by reverence, to enter a space with open hearts and open questions. Theater, once a novelty, is now woven into the fabric of society. And at the center of it all, still, Dionysus. He's here tonight, of course, sitting alone in the front row, disguised as an old man with an uneven beard and a satchel of dried dates. He offers one to the woman beside him, who takes it with a smile, not knowing she's sitting beside a god. You've come to recognize him in all his forms, not just the beautiful youth with wine-dark curls, but the beggar, the merchant, the overly enthusiastic fan who yells out praise mid-monologue. And backstage? Oh, it's chaos. It always is. Actors lose their lines. The wrong mask gets handed off. A satyr forgets which prop is his and walks on stage carrying a loaf of bread instead of a staff. But none of it matters. Because once the music starts, once the words begin to flow, something sacred happens. The masks come to life. The stage becomes a vessel. The audience is transported. And you're reminded yet again that theater is not perfection. It's presence. After the show, there's no ovation. The audience leaves in silence, not because they didn't enjoy it, but because they're still inside it, still carrying the dream of the fisherman bird, the longing in his wings, the ache of not quite flying. Dionysus nods as they go. That, he says, was worship. You believe him. More and more, his name is invoked before every performance, not as a formality, but as a kind of invocation. To Dionysus, they say, for madness and meaning. Offerings are left not just in temples, but backstage, grapes, sweet bread, tiny clay flutes. You once found a child's drawing of a goat with hearts around it tucked into the ivy-wrapped pillar behind the dressing area. These are his altars now, not of marble, but of memory. You've begun to understand something else, too. Dionysus isn't just the god of theater. He's the god of transformation, and nowhere is transformation more palpable than behind the curtain. You see it in the young woman who arrived a month ago, mute with grief, now belting out lines as if her voice could command the wind. In the boy with crooked teeth who stammers in speech but delivers monologues with impossible grace. In the chorus girl who finally stood in the spotlight and realized she could stay. This space, it changes people. And Dionysus? He smiles at every shift. Historians speak of Dionysian theater as a tool of the state, a cultural binder, a civic performance. But you've seen it in the raw, in sweat and tears and broken sandals. You know it's more than politics, more than spectacle. It's alchemy. The god is quieter these days, more watcher than instigator. But when he speaks, it's always with intent. The best parts, he told you once, are the ones I don't control. You think that's the truest thing he's ever said, because the plays now have a life of their own. They travel beyond Athens, beyond Greece, into colonies and cities you've never visited. The stories are retold, reshaped, characters renamed, endings rewritten. But the spirit, his spirit, remains. One morning you wake to find Dionysus gone. Not vanished, just absent. No explanation, no fanfare. Just a mask left hanging from a fig tree near the stage. It's blank, unpainted, waiting. You carry it with you, through every rehearsal, every performance, every moment of transformation. Because you know now what the mask means. It means he trusts you, the actors, the audience, the storytellers, to keep the fire burning, to pass the vine, to become what needs becoming. And as the sun rises over the empty theater, light catching the worn stone like memory itself, you whisper, "Thank you." Then, quietly, your scene isn't over. It's just changing stages. It's dusk again, the kind that feels more like a deep sigh than a time of day. The kind of dusk where stories start to peel themselves off the walls and stretch in the shadows. You walk through an empty theater. No audience, no chorus, just the lingering scent of myrrh and dust and dried wine. The stage is still, but you can feel it humming, like it remembers. The gods may sleep, but theater never forgets. Dionysus doesn't appear tonight, not in a mask, not in a disguise, not even as a whisper of laughter on the wind. But he's here, in the curve of the amphitheater, in the fading chalk lines on the stage floor, in the scratches backstage where someone carved their name next to a painted goat's tail. You take a seat in the front row, the same seat he used to claim. Ivy still grows near the base of the stone. Someone's left a half-eaten honey cake beside it, an offering, or maybe just an actor's snack forgotten during intermission. Tonight's performance? It's yours. The memories play across the empty space like ghosts in rehearsal. The nymphs dancing with newborn Dionysus in a hidden cave. The satyrs building masks from bark and bark laughter. The pirate ship blooming into vines mid-ocean. Pentheus, too proud to bend, torn by the madness he denied. The first dithyrambs, awkward, earnest, sacred. A king brought to tears by a speech about olive branches and broken promises. A child in the back row giggling so hard she forgets to be afraid. And through it all, transformation. That was always the point. Not applause, not spectacle, but the moment when someone on stage becomes, and someone in the audience remembers. Historians have tried to pin it down, what Dionysus gave the world. Wine, yes. Madness, of course. Theater, obviously. But it's more than that. He gave people back themselves, because behind every mask is someone longing to speak. Behind every costume is a soul asking for permission to feel. And behind every play is a moment where truth sneaks past your defenses and takes a seat beside you. You've seen it happen. In cities torn by politics, in villages too small to be remembered, in families who sit in the third row and leave holding hands again. And Dionysus, he never demanded temples. He built his sanctuary in the act of story, a place where everyone, gods and mortals alike, can be foolish, brave, broken, weeping, dancing, wrong, right, ridiculous, real. You lean back now, arms crossed behind your head, and close your eyes. The wind rustles the ivy. A bird sings one last line before night settles. Somewhere a flute starts to play, faint and slightly off-key. You smile. He's still here. Not just in Greece, not just in Rome, but in every place where a curtain rises and someone says, "Let me tell you a story." Theater will evolve. The masks will change. The languages will shift. But Dionysus, his laughter, his ache, his wild compassion, will remain. Because as long as there are humans, there will be stories. And as long as there are stories, there will be him. So go ahead, step onto the stage, pick up the mask, say your line. And if your voice trembles, or your costume tears, or your goat won't stop chewing the prop curtain, don't worry. He's watching, and he's already applauding. And now as the amphitheater fades, and the torches grow dim, and the final mask is laid to rest beside a cup of wine left unfinished, breathe. Let the stories slip back into the shadows for now. Let the laughter echo somewhere soft in the back of your mind. Let the tragic lines dissolve gently like mist. Let the goat hooves quiet. Let the chorus rest their voices. You're lying in that ancient seat now, stone-worn smooth by generations of dreamers, of actors, of watchers like you. The stars blink above, lazily rearranging themselves. You can almost hear the chorus, still humming, something low, something wordless, something meant to carry you over the edge of sleep. Let the vines curl gently around your thoughts. Let the masks fall away. You're no longer in Athens or Thrace or Thebes. You're not in a theater or a story or even a dream. You're just here, still, safe, and Dionysus, wherever he is now, in a breath of wind, in a snore from a passing satyr, in the smile behind your eyelids. He's smiling back, because you made it, through the story, through the madness, through the wine and the laughter and the longing. So rest now. The curtain has fallen, the lights are low, and tomorrow, maybe there will be another story to tell. But tonight, just sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams. And now, as the amphitheater fades, and the torches grow dim, and the final mask is laid to rest beside a cup of wine left unfinished, breathe. Let the story slip back into the shadows for now. Let the laughter echo somewhere soft in the back of your mind. Let the tragic lines dissolve gently like mist. Let the goat hooves quiet. Let the chorus rest their voices. You're lying in that ancient seat now, stone-worn smooth by generations of dreamers, of actors, of watchers like you. The stars blink above, lazily rearranging themselves. You can almost hear the chorus still humming, something low, something wordless, something meant to carry you over the edge of sleep. Let the vines curl gently around your thoughts. Let the masks fall away. You're no longer in Athens or Thrace or Thebes. You're not in a theater or a story or even a dream. You're just here, still, safe. And Dionysus, wherever he is now, in a breath of wind, in a snore from a passing satyr, in the smile behind your eyelids, he's smiling back, because you made it, through the story, through the madness, through the wine and the laughter and the longing. So rest now. The curtain has fallen, the lights are low, and tomorrow, maybe there will be another story to tell. But tonight, just sleep, sweet dreams.